So I'm doing this a little odd. I'm going through a PDF. I wanted to make sure that I included everything that we typically include in our resume workshop, which is usually a nice set of paper, but you know, for the time being, there's a virus that's ruining all the fun. So I wanted to make sure that going through this PDF, I could talk on all of the things that we would typically cover in our in-person workshops. So this is the lovely front cover of our packet. And the first thing we want to talk about is when you're thinking about, oh, sorry. All right, hello. Whenever you are thinking about developing your resume, you want to make sure that you're targeting your resume. Okay, our director has this really funny saying that a resume is like toilet paper and you only want to use it once. Okay, so every resume is going to look different depending on the job that you're applying for. And so you're going to hear me talk a lot about targeted resumes, which is I've got a very specific job that I'm applying for. I'm going to target my resume specifically for that job. And then we also have an industry resume. An industry resume is I'm going to the Career Expo, which I know all of you know and love, and I don't know who I'm going to talk to. I hope to talk to dozens of employers, and so I need to have a resume ready for that, or I need to have a resume ready for Handshake. Then you could develop what's called an industry resume. So we'll talk a little bit about both of those types of resumes throughout this. The first step, well, actually, the purpose of a resume, let me back up. A lot of people will say, well, it's so that you can get a job. But something we have to keep in mind here is before you get a job, you have to get an interview. And so that's the resume is going to be your golden ticket. Okay, because the employer doesn't know you, they know nothing about you. And so again, targeting that resume to be specific towards them, their job, their company is so important, because you could go on and on about all of the things, but if it's not relevant to the position you're seeking, then you're probably not even going to get into the interview. So I'm going to skip forward here a page, maybe. Here we go. All right, so something that I did not start off saying is we'll email you this packet afterwards. So some of this it's a little far away, and I'm going to skim through some of it, but this is a really cool sheet that we've added in the last year. We reached out to our employers, some of our sponsors for career services, and we said, hey, what are you looking for on a resume whenever you're looking at college graduate resumes? And so these were some of the pieces of advice that they gave. And so the way I like to think about it is like the staff of career services, we're like your mom and dad. Okay, we're going to be giving you lots of information, and you're going to be like, okay, yeah, sure. But then as soon as the cool aunt and uncles say, no, really, this is what you need to be doing, then people tend to listen more. So this sheet is the cool aunt and uncle of the packet. You can read through it whenever you have time after we send that over to you. And then this sheet here, this talks a lot about, you know, we have this idea, again, that we need to target our resume. So how do we do that? There's 100 different ways that we can do it, and you're probably already doing some of that. So getting to know the company, getting to know the industry. How do you do that? You go online. We all love Dr. Google, right? And job shadowing. Some of us have participated in job shadowing. LinkedIn, maybe going to the Career Expo and networking. Something that we like to preach in our office is the informational interviewing. So informational interviewing is simply, it's developing your network, but it's connecting with someone who's in your industry and just saying, hey, can I meet up with you for some coffee? Can we talk over lunch? And I'd just like to pick your brain about your industry. You know, what are you doing? What did it take to get to your role? What are they looking for in your company? So this is just a really informal conversation, and just getting to know kind of the inside tips on a company or on an industry. And another thing to keep in mind is that everyone is going to have an opinion on your resume, okay? And sometimes you're going to hear people say the exact opposite of what we're going to teach you today. So if it's someone who's in your industry, and that's the person who's potentially going to be hiring you, I would say go with them, go with what they're telling you to do on your resume. And you can learn a lot of that through informational interviewing as well. All right. Okay, so this sheet here, this is just uber important. NACE, that's the National Association of Colleges and Employers. They've identified the top 8 marketable skills that employers are looking for. Actually, employers have told them these are the top 8 marketable skills that we're looking for in college graduates. And so you can go through this list. So critical thinking and problem solving is the #1 skill that employers want to see from their applicants. Okay, and then it goes down this way, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Okay, so if you're someone who comes to my office and you say, Sam, I've never held a job before. First of all, I want to tell you that's okay. We talk to a lot of students who, you know, maybe they've never held a job, or maybe they've only ever worked at Payless, which was the case for me whenever I was a student. And they're saying, I don't know what to put on my resume. Well, this sheet is where it comes in handy. Is I've got all the space on my resume. The job description's not giving me a whole lot. What am I supposed to put on my resume? This is a really good sheet for you to consider because some of these skills, these are skills that you don't have to gain just through work experience, but maybe through volunteer opportunities, maybe through class, maybe through sports. The list goes on and on. These are things that you've gained through life experiences and not just work. So sometimes we tend to put ourselves in a corner and say, I can't put anything on my resume that isn't directly tied to work experience. So that's not the case whatsoever. I'm here to tell you right now. But this is just a really good sheet to keep in mind. Okay, so now we're going to do some practicing here real quick. I'm going to move all of your pretty little faces here. Okay, cool. So I've done some adjusting on this sheet. This is not what it typically looks like, but for the purpose of this webinar, this side, the left side of the screen, we call this the pink sheet. Okay, this is the heart of your resume, and it helps you to develop your qualifications section. So what you want to do is you want to have your pink sheet and your job description right next, lay them on the table right in front of you. Now, I'll be the first to say this is a horrible job description. I've essentially dissected it down to just the bare minimum for the purpose of this webinar, but you'll kind of get the idea of where we're going. Okay, so what we want to think about in column A, we have KSAs sought by the employer. Okay, so KSAs are knowledge, skills, and abilities. All right, so then what we want, what we want to do is we go over to our job description and we're going to go through those preferred qualifications and we're going to highlight, underline, circle all of those skills that we've got in our back pocket. Okay, so if we refer back to that, the employer tip sheet that I was talking about earlier, the very first one says, make sure that you can tell a story for everything that you have on your resume. And I could not preach hard enough on that one. Okay, so what I'm getting at is when you're going through and identifying the skills on their job description that you say, yes, I've got that. I've got that skill honed really well. If it's something that you can't tell a specific story about, so like for me, negotiation skills, honestly, I've not done a lot of negotiating in my time. So that would probably not be something that I would feel confident putting on my resume. Okay, so if that's the case, you want to make sure that you're only identifying skills that you feel comfortable with putting on your resume. So over here, of course, I put it on there, but this is just for example. So in column A, you'd go through and you'd list out all of those skills that you've identified on the job description, okay? And so in column B, it says, where have you used this KSA? Again, KSA is knowledge, skill, or ability. So this could be work, it could be volunteer work, it could be class, it could be sports, it could be church, it could, you get where I'm going, it could go any direction. So for me, collaboration, I'd put career services. Let's see if I can type while everyone's watching. All right, so proof, examples of you demonstrating this KSA. All right, I like to call this section the make or break column. Okay, so again, this idea of Do you have a specific story that you can tell regarding this skill? Okay, and here's a little insider tip is when employers are interviewing you, they want specific examples, okay? So when they ask you, tell me about a time that you gave an effective presentation and tell me why it was effective. They want you to provide a specific example. And I can easily pull that one out of my back pocket because I was actually asked that question for this for this job, and Kim might remember this, but I gave some very vague response. I wasn't lying, like my background's in theater, so I've done a lot of presenting, right? But I put it on my resume and they said, tell me about a specific presentation. I gave a really broad, general response. And afterwards, the woman who was interviewing me, she said, no, I need a specific example. Tell me about a specific presentation and why was that specific presentation effective? So hopefully the employer won't call you out like I got called out, but they might, so just beware of that. So column C is going to be that memory jogger that you need to remember that specific example. Okay, so we have collaboration as our skill. Career services is the place where I've demonstrated that skill. And so the proof of this skill for me might be one time at a career expo, we had some technical issues and I worked with IT to resolve quickly. Okay, so that's a made up example, although I'm sure it has happened at some point. So there we go, that's my memory jogger. So if I get asked, in my interview, they say, I see you've worked in a collaborative environment. Can you tell us a specific example of when you've used that skill and what was the outcome? I can quickly say, there was a time at a career expo when we had technical issues and blah, 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 blah. Okay, and then I can go right into that example. I can tell them the outcome and I've got that right in the back of my head. Okay, so then you would go through the rest of these and you're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to just type this just to fill the space, okay? And then in column D, this is where we want to rank these, what these are ultimately gonna be are our qualification statements on our resume and the order that we're going to place those qualification statements in. Okay, so now you would think that you would rank these according to your own strength and according to your own, maybe how comfortable you feel with a certain skill, but that's not the case. So for this, the way we want to rank this is which of these skills seems the most important to the employer. Okay, so the thing that we're thinking about here is we want to get that good information, those really good, hearty, relevant qualification statements higher up on our qualifications list. Okay, so employers, they spend about 10 seconds looking through your resume, and so you want to make sure that your good stuff is higher up on your resume. So that's kind of what we're doing with column D. So if we look over here, negotiation skills might be most important. This is, again, not a great example of a job description, but just as an example, we're kind of just working through the order that they show here. So you'd go on from there, but let's say you're applying for a job with career services. In our job descriptions, we talk a lot about serving students. And so in your qualification statements, you should probably have your experience working and serving students at the top of your qualifications list. So once we've gone through that, we've ranked all of these, we've gone through all of these skills that we've identified from the job description. Now what we need to do is we're going to go down here. I've pre-written it because I didn't want to have to type in front of you all because it's scary. So this is where you're going to come up with the actual qualification statement that goes on your resume. So if we're talking about collaboration, my qualification statement might be experience working in close collaboration with team members to identify and resolve issues with creative solutions. Okay, so you definitely want to word this according to the needs of the employer and making sure that you're really tying it back to that job description. So this is just kind of an example that you could work from, but the other thing to keep in mind here is whenever you're developing these qualification statements is you want to make sure that you're using their language. Okay, so I've said collaboration, which if we look back over here to their job description, it says collaborative team environment. So nowhere on their job description does it say teamwork. Okay, it says team, but it doesn't ever say teamwork. So the reason this is important, well, there's several reasons it's important. One, because you want to make that connection with that employer. If they use the term collaboration and collaborative in all of their mission statements and their job descriptions, and that's obviously a key word for them. But if you are applying for those bigger companies that maybe sends their resumes through a scanning program, before that resume ever gets to, let's say, human resources eyes, then what they're doing is they're looking for keywords, okay? And those keywords come from the job description. So making sure that you are including keywords such as collaboration in your resume is going to help kind of rack up the points, I guess, if we're going to make it kind of a game. So make sure you're speaking their language. And just really gearing these qualification statements around what the employer is wanting. Do we have any questions on this section so far? Okay, I'm gonna keep going unless Kim tells me to stop. All right. Cool, so these next 2 pages, essentially they're just words, okay? And they're really good words. So it's really helpful when you're developing those qualification statements. If you're like me and you use the same words over and over again, these sheets give you some words that you can refer to just to kind of help you develop those statements a little bit more. Okay. All right, and I'm going to scroll past these next couple of pages as well. There's some resume samples. So you're going to have access to some of our handy dandy resume samples, but we want you to use them to be inspired by them, but do not copy and paste, okay? Employers, they're very aware of that sort of thing. Some employers will put your information into Google and see if you've plagiarized. So, you know, your resume uniquely you, so make sure that you're not just copying and pasting what we've provided here. Okay, so I'm going to be working off of this big resume, and we're going to work our way all the way through it. We're going to start up at the top with the header. Whoops. Okay, so this one is a very standard resume sample. Okay, and the next 2 that I'm going to show are going to be for internships and for educators. So if you're planning on being a teacher, what I'm gonna do is I'll go to those next 2 resumes and we'll point out the differences in those resumes versus this one, because there's a couple of changes for either internship resumes or educator resumes. Okay, so some of the things that I'm gonna say are gonna sound silly, but I'm saying them because we've seen silly things before. So if you go up to the header of your resume, graduating student, here's silly thing number 1. This is your name, okay? Don't put graduating student on your resume. We have seen that before, and that's okay. I could understand where that confusion might happen, but that's gonna be your name, okay? Your header does not have to look like this. Okay, we see a lot of students try to recreate the same header. It's okay if it looks like this, but I think there's probably more creative things that you could do too. But speaking of creative, never include a picture on your resume. That kind of dips into EEO issues. So I would avoid putting a picture on your resume. And then if you're like a graphic design major or maybe more of a fine arts major, there's definitely a little bit more of a liberty to have more of a creative stamp as a header. I've seen some really cool resumes where it's had their name and then they have like a logo. I think that looks really cool. But if it's more of a traditional resume, like let's say you're an accountant, let me just tell you, those accountants are not going to think a logo is very cool. So, you know your industry and know the people that you're applying for. So you have your name, of course, that's going to be the biggest text on your resume. As for the address, you do not have to include this. It is on all of our samples, I believe, but you don't have to include that. I've seen some people include a city. I think probably different staff members have different opinions on this. Would you thumbs up if you agree with that, Kim?
I definitely agree.
Okay, cool. here's the deal, y'all. Kim has been doing resumes longer than I've been alive. And so,
Which is why Sam's teaching this. Yes.
No, it's intimidating. She knows all the things. All right. So then going forward on that header, of course, you want to include your phone number. So phone number and email, I would say those are definite. Yeah. Your phone number, the number one thing I would have to say about a phone number is make sure you have your voicemail set up. Okay. We have personally posted jobs and had like 40 students apply. And then I was calling students to set up interviews with them, and literally only 2 had their voicemail set up. And so this has messed people out of really great opportunities. Visa comes to our Career Expo every year, and they always interview the day after the Career Expo. And there was a couple of expos back, they had selected, I think it was like 8 people to apply for an internship. And only 7 people showed up, and we said, hey, where's that 8th person? And they said, well, we called them and they didn't have their voicemail set up. So that person lost out on an opportunity to intern with Visa, which is just devastating. So once you do have your voicemail set up, rather, make sure it's professional. I think it's always nice if you do more than just the thank you for calling 651-2345, that kind of default robot voice. If you can add your own name, that's helpful for us because, or when I say us, I mean employers, because then they know for sure they've called the right number. And then as for your email address, you can definitely use your Buff email for now. Once you graduate, I would move on to bigger and better things, but make it professional, so no Scooby-Doo105@yahoo.com. Some other things that I have seen on resumes are LinkedIn URLs. I've seen for some of those more, again, like graphic designs, maybe a link to their portfolio. Different majors, there's going to be different ways that you can highlight some of your contact information and make sure that you're including all of the relevant things. But yes, so that's the header, pretty straightforward. And then I'm going to move along to objective unless we have any questions about the header. So with the header, again, this is actually an optional section, but I would say probably most of career services prefers to have an objective. There's something about it. It's just a nice introduction to your resume. This gives the employer that you are applying for just a good idea, what job are you applying for? What skill set are you bringing to the table? So it's just a really nice, again, a nice intro. So if we're talking about an objective for a targeted position, so that technical sales position with Microsoft, an example of an objective statement for that might be to obtain the technical sales position with Microsoft, where my negotiation skills and strong written communication can impact your company. Okay, so that's really specific. I've highlighted the job title. I've highlighted the employer's name. So I've gotten really specific in my objective. Now, if we're talking about maybe more broad, I want to go to the Career Expo, how do I word this objective? The way you can think about that is to obtain a position in, I'm going to go rogue here, to obtain a position in marketing where my ability to identify and implement creative solutions for clients can increase company sales. Okay, so that was a horrible example, but you kind of get where I'm going. It's giving me the industry that I'm going for. It's highlighting 1 or 2 skills that you know for a fact are really relevant within that industry, and just telling the employer, like, what can you bring to the table? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to increase company sales, or I'm going to have an impact on the company. The thing you want to avoid with objective statements is you want to avoid saying, this is what I want to get out of the job. Okay, so what I mean by that is you don't want to say, to grow my knowledge and gain new skills. Okay, so I'm talking a lot about what I want. Okay, we want to make the entire resume about what can I bring to the table. This is what I can do. for you, the employer. All right. So really, when you're going through the entire resume, but especially in the subjective statement, make it all about them. Okay. Employers are selfish. We want to know what you can do for us. Okay. So you have to feed them that. All right. So if we scroll down to education, we're going to list only institutions, colleges and universities, or yes, institutions where you are either working towards a degree or have attained a degree. So first and foremost, we would not include high school. Rule of thumb is that we would not include high school on our resume, period. There's a section down at the bottom that we'll talk through where you could potentially list that you were valedictorian or salutatorian. Some of those really high honors that you might get as as a high school student. But for the most part, employers are going to be a little bit less interested in that high school information. Now, if you're a freshman in college, which some of you might be, I have the feeling probably most of you aren't, but if there are any, it might be okay to include, a couple of things, high school. But after that first year in college, we want to start letting those things fall off of our resume. Okay, so we have West Texas A&M University. That should be at the very top of everyone's education section. You want to spell out West Texas A&M University, not WTAMU. We want to include city and state, and then the full name of the degree and major. Okay, so that's Bachelor of Arts in Graphic Design, or Bachelor of Business Administration in Business Marketing. If you are running out of space, if you're having issues getting this all online, all in one line, you can abbreviate BS, BA, BBA, MBA. So for that GPA, if it's a 3.0 or higher, we would encourage you to include that on your resume. That's a really good achievement. And then for the graduation date, if you're graduating in May, so May 2020, you would just leave it at that. Okay, you don't have to put anticipated at that point. So if we are within the current semester of your graduation, you can leave off anticipated, or expected is another word that we'll see there. But if we're outside of that semester, you'll go ahead and include that there. So if you receive, let's say, dual credit from Amarillo College, that would not go on your resume, okay? It would have to be, did you attain an associate's from Amarillo College or Frank Phillips? Or if you have a bachelor's degree from another university, or if you, so on and so forth. Do you have the degree, or are you working towards a degree? So any of those kind of, I was there for a minute, I was here for a minute, you don't need to include those universities on your resume. The other thing that I do see quite a bit is on that graduation date, sometimes students will put date ranges. So August 2002 to May 2020, okay, and that happens. And so some of us are super duper seniors, and that's okay, but the employer doesn't necessarily need to know that. So just the date of month and year of graduation. Okay. So here we are at the summary of qualifications. So we've kind of dove into the bulk of this, and we kind of have an idea of how to develop this. Again, it's all completely based on that job description. Okay, that job description, that's your cheat sheet. Only lists relevant information here, okay? So there's typically going to be 5 to 7 qualification statements, okay? 5 to 7. Anything less is probably not going to give the employer enough information to work with. Anything more, their eyes are going to start glazing over. So 5 to 7 is that sweet spot. And the other thing on this section is make sure that you begin each statement with an action verb, but a different verb. Okay, so what I don't want to see is able to communicate effectively with others, able to work in collaboration with a team, able to, okay? Think about able to, proficient in, skilled in, experienced with, X number of years, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you get where I'm going. So keep it fresh, keep it different, and then make it uniquely you. Okay, so let me tell you, one thing we see is able to pick up new concepts quickly. Think outside of the box. And I'll be honest, this section is probably the hardest part of the resume to write. And there is absolutely no shame in doing your best here and then bringing your resume to a resume review and letting us polish it with you. That's okay. I get it, but we want you to put in your absolute best effort to really list things that are uniquely you, but again, relevant to the job that you're seeking. And then we can kind of help you tweak that. Okay. Were there any questions on this section? I'm gonna keep scrolling. I didn't hear any dings. Okay, cool.
We did have, Sam, we did have a question.
Oh,
we did
sure.
have a question about languages.
Okay, cool. Yes, so how do you list those on a resume?
My question was, so I am part of the business, and I'm trying to learn more languages. I currently speak English and Spanish fluently, but I am learning 2 other languages. And on my resume, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to put what level am I in each language, or should I just name that I know those languages? What would be or just not put them if I don't know them fluently yet?
Gotcha. So I have a couple of different opinions on this. Okay, so you said you're in business, and you know, a lot of people who are maybe going more the business route, there's definitely some benefit to saying, hey, here's my skill level in each of these. Okay, so I've seen some really cool, almost kind of a graphic design version of this where it says, okay, I'm this proficient in English, I'm this proficient in Spanish, I'm this proficient in Korean, and you know, kind of leveling those out, because if you're thinking about business majors, it may be really important that you know some amount of each of those languages. So you could definitely go that route. I would say, and Kim, I'll get your opinion on this too. An absolutely safe route to go is to now this could be listed in your qualification section. I would say probably maybe the last bullet point, saying fluent in English and Spanish.
Okay.
Okay. Kim, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I would say if it's part of the job requirements, I would definitely include it in the summary. I think if it's obviously it's a great skill regardless. So you may not give a lot of detail if it's not something that they're asking for. But if they're asking for, I would definitely say the level in terms of reading, writing, translating, that kind of thing, for whatever languages they're asking about.
If let's say they're asking for somebody that understands German, would I just only add it on the summary of qualifications and not on the objective? Or would I briefly add it on the objective? Because that would be sort of like a skill.
I would do one. Yeah, I would do one or the other. I wouldn't do both. But yeah, if you wanted them to see it quickly, then the objective would be a great place. Otherwise, I'd put it in the summary.
Okay, perfect.
All right, thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Good question, Michelle. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I'll keep scrolling forward and we'll talk about work history here. Okay, so in my opinion, besides the qualification section, this section probably gets the most questions because everyone's got like all kinds of experience or a lack of experience, or you know, this section can be what you need it to be in a sense. Okay, so I'm going to talk about it very traditionally first, and then I'll talk about some other options that we see pretty often with student resumes. Okay, so we're going to list our experiences in reverse chronological order. So current job or most recent job, and then go backwards from that. Okay, so we have the name of the business, we have the job title, let me move y'all's box here, city and state, dates of employment. So if you're still working there, that would be May 2019 to current, or May 2019 to present would be a different way of listing that as well. And then for the bullet statements under these, you can use those to highlight some of the accomplishments that you received or that you accomplished during your time in that position. Maybe they were things that went above and beyond your job title. So let's use a very basic example of waitress. Okay, we see a lot of waitress jobs because it's a very traditional college position, which is awesome. So if you have waitress on your resume, these bullet statements, something that we don't want to see is that you clean tables, you took food to tables, you served people. You know, you want to think more, what were those highlights? What were those accomplishments? Did you do things that were above and beyond your job title? So that could be you were employee of the month, you developed a system that made business processes more efficient. The other way to think about these bullet points is, you know, think about the job that you're applying for, okay? Is it relevant to the job you're applying for? So let's say the job is a waitress and the job you're applying for is maybe a concierge at a hotel, okay? So if that's the case, then probably a relevant thing that we could list here is worked closely with the public to ensure needs were met. You want to think about like, not only about like those highlights, those accomplishments, but you want to think about like, what's the relevant information that I got from this job? Now, some of those things may have already been listed up in your qualification statements. And if that's the case, then again, like Kim said, we don't really want to repeat ourselves, okay? You don't want to be redundant on your resume. But let's say you have a job like I did. I worked at Payless. I clocked in, clocked out, did nothing great. I sold shoes. But there wasn't much else to it. You don't have to have bullet points under your job. I would say don't shortchange yourself. Like if there's really something incredible that you did in that position, don't shortchange yourself. Okay, so we've kind of looked at this from a more traditional standpoint. The other way I want to think about this is, if we have any like engineer students in here, this is the population that came to mind. They come in all the time and they're like me. They've held a lot of, they're not like me at all. What am I saying? They know a lot more than I do, but they come in and maybe they've worked at Payless, let's say, and you know, they've listed these really traditional student jobs. But in the meantime, in class, they're working on some amazing projects. Okay, and so the way I like to work with those students and the rest of our staff will is maybe rather than a work history section, or maybe in conjunction with a work history section, we have a projects section. Okay, so if we do that, maybe we list projects right above it. Okay, again, we're trying to get that good stuff up on the top of our resume, higher up on our resume. I've worked with students who, again, have had those really traditional jobs, but they've done some really cool volunteer opportunities that are right in line with the industry they're going into. This one girl wants to be a vet, and she volunteered in China and like worked with pandas. And I was like, how can we get that higher up on your resume? Let's put that's good stuff. So there's so many different ways that we can work this section. So, you know, just depending solely on your traditional work experience, for some of you, that's great. And for some of you, that's all you have, and that's great too. But for some of you, maybe you've done some really cool projects, you've done some really cool internships. We'll talk about internships here in a second, but maybe done some cool volunteer gigs, some class projects. We can definitely help you think about how to get that information up higher on your resume and list that. The last section on our resume is going to be activities and honors or involvement. This section can be what you need it to be. Okay, this is the section that's like, oh yeah, and by the way, it's going to be things like, these are some student organizations I'm involved in, some scholarships I've received, this is the volunteer work I've done, some community work, president's list, dean's list, those sorts of things can go here. There are some students that I talk to that say, I don't have anything that I can list in this section. And I can usually pull something out of them. However, every now and again, maybe they just don't have anything. And if that's the case, then you don't have to have this section. However, I will kind of stop and give you a mom moment that employers are interested in seeing those sorts of things on your resume. They want to see that you're involved, that you're volunteering. There are some employers that that's going to be high up on their consideration, their list of considerations. So just know that if you're not involved, get involved, okay? But if you don't have anything for right now, just know this section does not have to be there. But you want to name this section what it is, okay? So if it's all scholarships, you want to call it honors or scholarships. If it's student organizations and that's it, then maybe you call it involvement or activities, okay? So you kind of get where I'm going. But this section can be what you need it to be. So I'm going to keep going. And okay, so this is our internship resume. So really quickly, the related coursework section is going to be the difference on those sections. Okay, and so if you are applying for an internship position, the purpose of this section is that it's going to speak on behalf of the experience that you might be lacking. Okay, it's going to speak to what you know academically. And so you want to think about listing those higher level courses. So you don't have to list course numbers, you just want to list course names and only relevant courses. Okay, so you don't have to list English 1000, those sorts of courses either. Okay, so then we have our teaching resume. The two big differences here is we want to make sure that our teachers are listing their certification status. Again, you're going to have access to this sample after this webinar, so I'm going to go a little bit faster, but you want to make sure that you list that certification status. And then also in conjunction with your work history or experience section, you want to make sure that you are listing your classroom experience as well. And you want to pull that separately from your work experience so that, again, we're getting that good relevant stuff higher up and separated from our Payless jobs. So those are the big differences between those teaching and internship resumes. And then this sheet is going to talk to you about some formatting stuff. So there's, different font sizes, different font types, keeping it classic and not going too big with your fonts, making sure your margins are within a certain size limit. And the number one thing that we would have to preach is don't use a template, okay? If you ever need help with formatting, templates are so hard to maneuver. I understand sometimes you're in a pinch and you have to do it, and that's fine, but just know that they are awful later down the road. So
Sam,
I'll let y'all refer to, yes ma'am.
We did have a question about using color. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so number one rule about color is we would always say avoid red. Red's is considered a power color. I would say like a deep maroon is probably okay, but I'd probably even be cautious about that. But yeah, red's seen as a power color. And then this all goes back to this idea of, is the position I'm applying for, is it traditional? Am I applying for an accounting firm? I probably go black and white on that. But if we're talking about, I'm applying for the marketing position with Panhandle Plains Museum, I think a little bit of color is fine. I would definitely think about like, how does this print out? I see we're getting some questions on this one. We're stirring the pot with the color. See how it prints out. Does it print out where it's something that you can read easily? But yeah, I would say don't go crazy with the color, but a little color is okay, especially if you're trying to make sure that you're standing out. But I'd be cautious about the types of colors that you use. Was there anything else, Kim? Okay. All right, so references sheet. First thing, you want to copy and paste the header that you've used on your resume. Keep things consistent. The same will be with your cover letter. You can just keep that same header. For references, you want to make sure that you're using 3 to 5 references unless the employer specifies a certain number, okay? Some employers will say, hey, provide us with 4 professional references, and if you provide them with 3, they might go, no, they don't know how to read instructions. So be really careful about that. Some people will do that to kind of add in that extra barrier to see if you are detail oriented. So here's a suggested layout of Miss Ima Eaton of Taco Bell, our suggested layout for these references. Another thing to keep in mind with references is make sure you call them, ask them, is it okay if I put you down as a reference? I've had people put me down as a reference and I was not aware, I was not prepared to talk about them, and so it makes it hard on the person. So make sure you call them, make sure you ask them. And if they hesitate at all, I would not put them down as a reference. And make sure you ask them also, what email, what phone number are you okay with me putting down? But yeah, so this is the general layout. That italicized word there, that's going to be how you know the person. But if the employer is asking for professional references, something to keep in mind is a coworker is a personal reference. You never want to put mom, dad, or family down. You want to make sure that these are people that can speak to your work ethic, that they can, these are people who maybe were in a supervisory role. It could be faculty advisors. It could be someone you've volunteered under. Of course, it could be supervisors. So there's a number of ways that you can do these references. But over on the side, here's some general tips that you'll want to read through as you're developing your reference sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward. No, I'm not. Just kidding. There we go. Okay, so really quick on cover letters. Okay, so first thing we want to say about cover letters is make sure that you are addressing this to an actual human. Okay, to whom it may concern is not the end of the world. However, if you can address it to a specific person, that's going to be all the better. Okay, and if you're like, I don't know who I'm supposed to address this to, the thing I would suggest is give that company a call and say, I'm applying for such and such position. Who can I address my cover letter to? And they may say, oh, just address it to HR or address it to the hiring committee. And if that's what they say, then that's fine. But they might also provide you with a specific name. And sometimes when I tell students that, their eyes get really big because it's scary to call an employer. But the thing is you're getting your name in front of them, and what's the worst that can happen is they can say, oh, that darn Kim, she is so driven, she really wants this job. So it's okay to call them and ask that question. All right, so just kind of the meat of a cover letter. When you're developing that first paragraph, this is going to tell them why you're writing, what position are you applying for, where did you find that position. This is a brief intro. Again, it's kind of like, in a way, kind of like that objective statement. So I'm writing concerning the technical sales position with Microsoft. I found this position in Handshake, and I believe that my qualifications would make me an excellent candidate for consideration. Okay, so easy as that, straightforward. And then when we're developing that middle paragraph or middle paragraphs, you really want to think about, a couple of the qualification statements that seem most pertinent to this position. Okay, and the cover letter, well, actually, let me back up. The resume, we've highlighted those qualifications. Now in the cover letter, we can dive in and tell a little bit more of a story about that. So let's say that collaboration is something that's really important to them. So the thing you want to think about when you're developing these statements is one, you're telling a story, and two, how can you take that story and wrap it back around to them? Okay, like here's what we want to think about is again, that employers are selfish. They want to know what you can do for them. So I can go on, and I can tell all about how in career services, we love collaboration. We're big hippies for collaboration, and we're one whole team. Okay, so that's great, but the employer wants to know, well, what does that matter to me? Okay, so I've told them my story about career services. Here's what we did as far as the collaboration goes, and here's how I can apply it to this position. And then in that last paragraph, this is where it says close to make a specific request for an interview. Now, if you're me, that's terrifying and scary. So the way I might approach this last paragraph is on April 20th, I will call to ensure that you've received my application materials, and at that point, I would love to further discuss my interest in this position. I look forward to talking to you, and thank you for your consideration of my application materials. Okay, so that last line, it says keep the ball in your court. Never do you want to say, I hope to hear from you soon. That's putting the ball in their court and saying, well, I hope I hear from you. If you do that first example of what I said, that's giving them a specific date. I'm going to follow up with you, and I'm going to show you that I'm really interested. And so if you do give them whatever month we're in, April 20th, you got to make sure that you call them back on April 20th. So make sure you stick to your guns and follow through with that. And then here's some general tips about the cover letter. We do review cover letters. So it's much more helpful if you bring the job description with you, and we can really, look that through and see how we can target that cover letter. And the very last piece that I'll say about the cover letter is I would redo it every single time. Okay, I don't know how many times just in this last semester we've had 2 positions open in career services, and people have addressed cover letters to Northwest Texas Hospital and I think AgriLife. And so just know that will kick you if you're not careful. And then on this sheet, it just shows you a couple of different ways that you would format your cover letter. So if you're sending it in person, this left side of the screen shows you how that would be sent in physically. The second side of the page shows you if you had to attach it to an email document. That's how that would work. All right, really quick on thank you notes. Always, always, always write a thank you note after you've interviewed. What I would suggest is after you've gone through your interview process, have some thank you notes in your car and handwrite that note as soon as you get out so you don't forget anything. You can include salient information, and you're just thanking them for the opportunity to be considered for the position. And you can make those references to, maybe they said, oh, I'm going on vacation with my family next week. You can close off by saying, I hope you enjoy your vacation in California. Or you can also, say you mentioned this project that you're going to be implementing next month. I would love to learn more about that, and we'll be looking into that information in the coming weeks. So just referring to things you've talked about in the interview, it does not have to be long. It does not have to be formal. It's just short, sweet, to the point. But make sure that you're writing thank you notes to everyone that was involved in the interview process. At the end of the interview process, you just grab some business cards rather, and making sure that you are addressing either a handwritten note preferably or an email to each of those on that hiring committee. This sheet is just a self-grading rubric. If you're like, this woman was crazy, I'm not going in for a resume review after that, you can look through this grading sheet, and it'll kind of give you an idea of where your resume is. And then just very quickly, I know we're just about at time here. We do have Handshake. All of you registered for the webinar through Handshake, so you have some idea of you understand that it exists, which is awesome. But if you ever need help with it, just let us know. We're happy to help you with that. And then resume reviews. Now that you've attended a workshop, your next step is going to be word vomiting and building this resume. And I say word vomiting, I want you to put every thought and idea and potential skill on a resume, and then come to us. Even if it starts spilling over into multiple pages, bring it to us and we can help you decide how to polish that down, cut it down, trim things out. But now that you've attended the workshop, you can come to walk-in Wednesdays. It's a little too soon for that, but one day you will be able to walk in all day for a 15-minute drop-in appointment, Wednesday 8 to 5. Of course, you can still do appointments through Handshake. Schedule a 30-minute resume review with one of our staff members. We'll review your resume through Zoom. Okay, so once you've done a resume review, you can attend a mock interview. So it's just a practice interview. We bring in actual employers to do interviews all the time. And so you spend 30 minutes with them, 15 minutes practicing, 15 minutes with them giving you some feedback. It sounds like self-inflicted torture, but I don't know that there's been maybe one student in the past many, many years that has left saying that was awful. But really, it's just good practice. It's a no pressure interview. We do internship workshops typically every second and fourth Friday at 11 a.m. And then career coaching is another appointment that we do. And you can sign up for that through Handshake if you're needing some additional ideas on, I'm majoring in business, but what am I going to do with that? Career coaching is a great opportunity for you to just sit down with one of our staff members and brainstorm and really think through that process. Some different job search hacks. here for you. We've gone through this about 100 times, so there's some really good stuff. If you're applying for jobs and you've run out of ideas, this will be a great sheet for you to reference and give you some additional thoughts and ideas. And then that is all I have. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Oh, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Okay, so I think I might have missed it. How long should a resume be? Should it just be a page?
That's a great question. So I would say for most traditionally aged students, it's going to be a page. However, I've seen some students who have a wealth of maybe like internships, a lot of good experience that, it starts to span over into 2 pages. I think 2 pages is okay if you can fill 2 pages. Okay. So if it's just like you're barely, there we are. If you're barely covering that second page, I would bring it in for a resume review, and we can probably talk about one formatting. Formatting is usually the #1 issue with those longer resumes. So we can help you with that. But what I don't want to see happen is for students to throw away really good relevant information just to fit on 1 page. Okay, so come in for a resume review would be my #1 tip, and let us help you really figure that out and see what's appropriate for you. But good question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Jacob has a question about certifications. You could Jacob, you could include those in your qualifications if that's important. You could even list it in your summary, or excuse me, your objective statement if it was that important. Or you could also list it at the very bottom in your kind of other section with activities and honors and that sort of thing. So really any of those places.
Resume, for example. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. That's super cool. Marketing certification. Yeah, I think that's good. If it's like a lifeguard certification, like we're talking different things, but yeah, that's awesome. All right, cool. Unless you have anything, you are welcome to leave the meeting. We're all here to support you however you need. This is a crazy time, so definitely use us however you need, okay? Y'all have a great evening and stay warm.